Okay, we'll do a mic test first. Can you hear me okay? Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019, and this is the time for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Utah Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining's October meeting. My name is Mike Brown. I'm acting chair of the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and will be chairing the meeting today on behalf of Chairman Gill, who was not able to attend our meeting. Before I turn the time over to Director Baza for the briefing session, I would like to thank him and his staff for a wonderful field trip yesterday. Tommy, Paul, you guys, that drone stuff was fantastic. Thank you so much. And just thanks to the staff for always doing such a great job and helping us learn more about the real world out there. Also, we have several representatives from the area here today from Carbon County. We welcome you and hope you take the opportunity to introduce yourselves to the board members and give us the chance to get to know you better. We appreciate your attendance. With that, Mr. John Baza, the Director of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, is going to lead our briefing session. So, Director Baza, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, and welcome board members. We're certainly appreciative of the opportunity to go out into other areas of the state besides Salt Lake City, and this price meeting is one of those opportunities. We're glad that you were able to come and attend our field trip with us, and we know that it's an extra effort to travel and be part of this, but I think it helps as we go out into the communities where we have the most activity to meet with people and to see those activities on the ground. So again, thank you for taking the time to do this. As Mr. Brown mentioned, my name is John Baza. I'm the director of the division, and we'll have a fairly concise briefing for you this morning. We'll certainly be done before the formal matters start at 10 o'clock. The first thing we have on our agenda this morning is a briefing on rail line development that will travel from the Uinta Basin to the Price area. And to do that, we have two representatives of Rio Grande Pacific. The first is Mr. Mark Hemphill, who's a vice president for the company. And then we have Pam Giuliano, his director of government affairs for Rio Grande Pacific. You may have heard a lot about the proposed plans for rail development. I know I've seen several presentations myself on this, and Mr. Hemphill came out to our Duchesne meeting this month at the Uinta Basin Collaborative in order to present some of the same information. So let me turn the time over to them, and they'll give you a briefing on the rail line development.
Thank you, Director Baza. Board members, thank you for inviting us here to talk to you today, and I'll try and keep this brief so that you can maintain your schedule. My name is Mark Hemphill. I'm Vice President of Rio Grande Pacific Railroad. We're a company that owns 5 short-line railroads in the western and Midwest U.S., about 700 track miles of railroad, 350 employees, and we're unique in that we like to build new railroads, and building new railroads is very difficult. Their last major railroad was built in the United States in the late 1970s in Wyoming's Powder River Basin to haul coal out of the Powder River Basin. And we're excited by this project. It's difficult to find a great project that has a great business case for it like this one, and it's difficult to find a state that has the political environment and the willingness to entertain development and big project development. Infrastructure like this is complicated. There's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of federal and state regulation around it, and many people view these projects as too hard to do, but we like this sort of work. We're partnered on this project with a company called Drexel Hamilton. They're a New York private equity firm that's placed over $3 trillion, mostly in infrastructure, and they like to develop new infrastructure projects as well. They're currently the developer of a $2.5 billion oil export project in Louisiana, consisting of pipeline of 800,000 barrel a day pipeline from Cushing, Oklahoma to an oil terminal in the lower Mississippi, as well as a offshore oil terminal that will be the largest oil export offshore terminal in the Western Hemisphere when completed in 2 years. Drexel Hamilton's role is on this project is to finance it and commercialize it. Our role is to build it, operate it, and maintain it. We're also partnered with the 7-County Infrastructure Coalition, which is made up of 7 counties in eastern and central Utah. Duchesne, Daggett, Carbon, Emery, Sevier, San Juan. I'm missing one. Am I?
Duchesne, Uinta.
Uinta, there we go.
Yeah.
The coalition has been pushing for this project for many years. I first started working with them, in fact, in 2014, when they were able to get some interest from the state legislature and provide some funding to look at the environmental document it'd take to build the railroad. Our goal is to get the railroad commercialized in the next 6 months, by March of next year. Commercialized means that we get the commitments from the oil producers and refiners that will be the backbone of the traffic on the railroad. No one builds a project like this without commitments from shippers that will actually use it. The shippers might be the producers, it might be the refiners, or a combination of both, but those commitments have to be in place in order to finance this. Once commitments like that are in place, financing a railroad like this is not hard. This is just like a pipeline on the FERC process, except we don't have a FERC process. We can do it without the federal regulation on the commercialization. Once financed, the coalition is meanwhile working on the environmental impact statement. They expect to have their draft EIS produced in February next year and reach their final EIS and a record of decision by December of 2020. We'll start construction in January of 2021 and have 2 construction seasons to build it. It can be complete in late 2022 or early 2023. The total cost to build the railroad is about $1.5 billion, including the development costs and its terminals. There's nothing particularly unusual about the construction of the railway, nothing technically unusual or challenging about it. It's like any project like this, there's 1,000 details that all have to be answered and addressed. The most important is that the producers and the refiners want the product and want to make long-term commitments to ship oil from the Uinta Basin. We're excited about it because we think that the Uinta Basin is the greatest untapped basin or partially tapped oil basin in the United States. We think that the railway will enable the basin to reach its potential without having a lot of impact on Utah DOT's highways and without having a lot of impact on communities. And by doing that, we think we can not only provide what the producers need, which is long-term reliable transportation, but also do it without using the public dollar and putting an impact onto the public purse for maintaining highways for long-haul truck transportation. Anything else I should add to this, Pamela?
No, I think you should just highlight a little bit about where the Rio Grande came from.
Yeah, the name Rio Grande Pacific actually comes from Utah from 1983 with the Thistle mudslide. The company was formed to build a connection track over to what was called the Marysville branch of the Denver and Rio Grande Western, over to Nephi to connect with Union Pacific. So it connected the 2 railroads. The project didn't get built because there wasn't political support for it at the time. I should also mention that we've been cooperating with the Ute tribe and with Ute Energy Company. They have entered into a tentative term sheet with us, and we like working with the tribe. They're a delight to work with. I think that they're interested in the project, of course, because of their own resources and their own development of their own resources, as well as the benefit it would bring to their tribe, and hope that we can enter into an agreement with them here shortly. Thank you.
My responsibility with the project is related to government relations. We look at them also as a partner, whether it's board members, affiliate, county, state, or federal agencies, as well as the elected officials. So Mark mentioned that the previous attempt of a rail project didn't have the political support. So we need to be mindful and make sure that we've answered the questions and we've been present. Thank you so much for the invitation and the time. We've enjoyed working with Gordon and having also some time with Ruland. So a pleasure to be before you today. And also, just to let you know, we're accessible. We'll make sure you get our contact information. But if you have questions, to reach out to either one of us, we'd appreciate that. Thank you, Director.
Board members, any questions?
Yeah, you mentioned pipelines as an alternative you're a railroad, did anyone look at the pipeline alternative and what was the cost of the pipeline alternative?
We haven't looked at pipeline alternatives, but the coalition has, and certainly we've talked with a lot of producers and refiners that have looked at pipelines as well. Pipelines might have a lower capital cost, but we haven't found anyone that we've talked to that is interested in undertaking the technical challenges of building a heated pipeline to move the waxy crude. There was a Chevron pipeline for some time that ran for some time, moving waxy crude out of the basin, but apparently it didn't succeed.
Thank you.
I can answer that a little bit, Susan. There's been talk of pipelines for lots of years. The one that got the closest to Tesoro was going to do one basically paralleling the Chevron pipeline up through Tabiona, Hanna, right through our ranch up there and over the hill. But it ran into some big problems over in the counties closer to the Wasatch Front. They didn't want any part of that. They were also talking about one over to come this direction to the railroad, but they were going to have to crack the oil. I don't understand how that works, but they were going to make it so that they didn't have to heat it. It was 670 LLC, and they were out getting right-of-ways. They were pretty serious, but then that went away too. So there's been lots of people try, but it's never materialized. So
We've certainly looked at the economic case on a pipeline because we want to understand if the pipeline is going to be a more economically feasible option, and because if it is, then our investment in our railroad is stranded. And Drexel Hamilton's put a lot of effort into that through their oil and gas people. Their conclusion on it is the pipeline is challenged for a number of reasons. First, it will have more touches on the oil because you're moving oil in a truck from a wellhead to a pipeline terminal and then taking it out of a pipeline and putting it into a rail car because you can't run a heated pipeline all the way to the Gulf. So you're adding extra touches to it, whereas we just have one touch, which is the truck to railroad at a terminal in the basin, and then it's rail all the way to the Gulf Coast. The second reason that pipeline wasn't attractive from an investment point of view from our investment partners is it's not scalable. If you build a 65,000 barrel a day pipeline, that's all it will ever move, and if you want to do another 65,000, you build another pipeline and so forth. Our railroad CapEx, by comparison, our CapEx we figure our minimum to get to a project that's financeable is about 130,000 barrels a day. But our capital expenditure for 130,000 barrels a day or 350,000 barrels a day is identical. It doesn't change. So as the basin grows in quantity, what it can produce and the market has the demand for it, then the railroad becomes a much more economic solution than looping pipeline. The other thing, one of the last thing on the railroad is it also moves frac sand and other products as well, which a pipeline can't do. So we drove over Indian Canyon yesterday after a meeting in Duchesne, and we counted 15 sand trucks just in the Indian Canyon between Duchesne and Helper.
Other questions from the board?
just the reroutes, the two reroutes around the mini ranches and then the one on this side of the hill, is that the preferred route now? Is that approved or?
So the federal approval process on a railroad is through an agency called the U.S. Surface Transportation Board, which is an independent agency. It has 5 board members. 3 are appointed by the president and 2 by the other party. So it will always be a majority by the party that owns the White House. The STB's role in the U.S. is to regulate railroads for their economic well-being, and so it regulates maximum rates, it regulates mergers, it regulates construction and abandonments. It's not a safety agency, it's purely an economic agency. Any new build railroad such as this one is under the STB's purview for the environmental approval and for the economic approval. The STB is in control of the process of whether or not your railroad gets built, whether you get a license to build your railroad, as well as the route that you're going to select. They have an Office of Environmental Analysis that is managing the lead agency on the environmental impact statement for this project. Currently, there is 4 routes before the STB for its consideration. One that runs, they all start in the Uinta Basin near Mighton and Roosevelt. One goes to Craig, and the other 3 all come out near Soldier Summit, near the railroad station of Cayune, which is sort of the very upper end of the Price River Canyon, where Emma Park Road meets US 6. Those 3 routes that all connect at that location go in different directions to get into the basin. whereas the Craig route is, of course, going a completely different direction off to the east. The STB will choose among those 4 routes of which they think has the lowest impacts and is the best, and the route is in the best public interest. And the STB can also say no railroad at all, that we don't agree that this railroad has, that its environmental effects are too severe, or that we do not feel that it's in the public interest to build it. So the STB can always come back and say no build. The route that the coalition and us believe is the best route is what's called the Whitmore Park route. It leaves or connects to Union Pacific and BNSF at Cayune at the top of Price River Canyon. Basically runs eastward along Emma Park Road until it crosses US Highway 191, and then uses a number of loops to go up to a 3.1 mile long tunnel through the Tavaputs Plateau. And that's called the Whitmore Park route because it gets east of 191 in an area called Whitmore Park. Once it passes through that tunnel, it descends in Indian Canyon, parallel to US Highway 191, until just short of Duchesne and about 2 miles south of Duchesne, and then turns eastward and goes to terminal locations in the Maitent and Leland Bench area. So that's the preferred route from our perspective. It has, we think, the lowest impacts on the environment and the best economic case going for it. And but it remains to the STB to choose which route they want.
I forgot to mention one point, and that is that we have on the political support side, we've managed to secure a letter of support that includes the majority of the members from the Utah federal delegation. So both senators, Congressman Bishop, Congressman Stewart, and Congressman Curtis have all signed on to that, as well as a letter of support from Governor Gary Herbert and Senate President Stuart Adams, all offered letters of support. So while we're not here to ask for a letter of support on behalf of the project, it may be beneficial to think about in the future as the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, the board, if you'd like to offer a letter of support to the coalition, I can certainly help you with the language on that.
I have a question about the EIS process that you mentioned. How long do those typically take for a project of this size?
The Surface Transportation Board has its own processes and unique, and they usually are fairly quick. The last one I did with the STB was a merger of 2 railroads in Chicago, which was opposed by thousands of people. Most of our public meeting had 2,000 to 3,000 opponents at them, and we did that EIS start to finish in 11 months. So STB on this one is figuring 18 months, and we think that that's realistic.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if other agencies could learn from their example?
It would be nice, yes.
Great. Well, this is exciting. I think the board members are excited. We certainly support what we're hearing. We thank you for your presentation today. I'll offer the board members one more opportunity for questions. Seeing none, we're back to you, Mr. Baza. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hemphill and Ms. Giuliano. We appreciate you being here,
Our pleasure.
and we'll look forward to hearing more progress as time goes on.
She's, how far do you live from right here?
I live in Helper.
Yeah.
Not
a long
too
drive.
far. Tell you where you can stop and get coffee.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It is regarding informal rulemaking for mineral suspension rolls. And to start this out, I'd like to just review for you real quickly the process of rulemaking and tell you what our preferred model is as we go through rulemaking. First of all, rulemaking starts with an idea from someone, and it can be just about anyone. Most often you'll hear the division come before you as a board and say, hey, we have this idea for a rule change, but it can come from other parties as well. If the division initiates that, there would normally be a board briefing on the subject. And that's what we've actually gone through that process with the item today, and we're not I'm not quite at that step in this explanation, but we would come to you and we would say, hey, here's an idea for rulemaking. What do you think? Should we start going through the informal process on it? And then the division would ask the board at that time for your permission to conduct an informal rule discussion. We don't necessarily need to call that rulemaking, but at least start the discussion and start the collaborative effort. That informal process doesn't have any structure to it. It can be done in just a number of different ways, but it is a time for collaborative effort by the division internally so that we can iron out any details of that, for external stakeholder discussions so that we can talk to people who the rule may affect or impact. It's a time to do drafts and redrafts, address concerns, etc. And this can occur quickly or it can take a considerable amount of time depending on identification of the issues, the resolution of the conflicts, and the level of consensus we can achieve during that collaborative effort. So after we receive an acceptable draft from the division for board consideration, the division would come to the board and present that draft to you and say, we think it's time for formal rulemaking. That's what you're going to hear from us today. This process is dictated by the state's Division of Administrative Rules, that formal process. Yes, there are rules on how to make rules, and we have to follow those. So when we start that formal rulemaking process, one of the first steps is to publish in the state bulletin. That can occur twice a month, either the 1st or 15th or 16th, I can't remember the exact day, but at the beginning of the month or mid-month. And it provides an opportunity for public comment. It doesn't have to have public hearing. It can include one, and in fact, the guidelines of administrative rules says that we encourage you to have a public hearing on it. But the public hearing is only necessary by rule and statute if you get a certain number of requests for that public hearing. But that entire time that we set aside for public comment is open for written comment, which the division would receive. Comments that we receive in the informal process as a division should be reiterated, if necessary, during the formal process, just to be included in the public record. Because none of the stuff we do in the informal process becomes a public record. It's only until we enter into the formal process that we have that. And the board sets the time frame for formal rulemaking. You can say it can be as little as 30 days, which is frankly difficult to do with the timing between board hearings, or you can go as long as, I think, 120 or 160 days. I forget how long you can go. But once you reach the end of that formal process and that public comment is received on that formal rulemaking, you have 3 options. You can either, number 1, adopt the rule as it was printed and published. You can drop the rule from consideration and say, no, changed our minds, we don't want to do that. Or 3, you can revise the rule and republish it for an additional comment period. So you can see informal rulemaking can take a varying length of time. Formal rulemaking can depend on whether you decide to go through the iterative process of revising and republishing. So I wanted to provide that to you just as a primer on how we like to conduct business. I think we've had experience recently where that wasn't followed, and we kind of got into kind of a waterworks of difficulty in trying to achieve that. But I think if we can kind of stick to that process, I think you'll find that there's more structure to how we do rulemaking, and it should be much easier for you as a board to consider rules as they come forward. So with that in mind, we'd like to present to you our concept for formal rulemaking for mineral suspension. And this is one that we've been involved in for quite some time in discussions, and Dana Dean and Natasha will come forward, and I think Steve Alder, you may have had an introductory comment to make on it?
I think we'll skip that.
Okay.
We covered everything.
So we'll have Dana Dean, Deputy Director for the division, and Natasha Baleff come forward, and they'll provide an explanation on the, looks like Paul Baker, our Minerals Programs Manager, is here as well.
Yes, thank you. I asked Paul to join in case you have specific questions about the rule. He's read it more recently than I have, and he's very well informed on it. I'm more generally informed on it. I read it for the meetings we were having, but I have not reviewed it since then. So this process started with, actually, there was a concern from a public citizen, Ms. Sarah Fields, who is actually here today to give comment. But prior to 2015, she was concerned about some mines that seemed to be inactive for a period of greater than 10 years, and she was concerned about the risks that they were posing. In 2015, we had what's called an informal conference where we listened to her. It was Paul and myself. She told us her concerns. And as she was speaking, it made sense to us that our rules on suspension are not clear whatsoever, and it's hard for us to enforce them because of that. The current rules do not mesh with the statute in some instances, and it's difficult to really decide when someone's been in suspension and needs to do something according to the statute, or the rule, which right now the rule says that the board needs to revoke their permit unless they've been operating or they can show greater cause. So we actually, back in the 2014-2015 timeframe, one of the particular mines that was of concern to Ms. Fields was we interpreted the rule that they were not in suspension because they were continuing to maintain the property. They had a bond with us, and they weren't really causing any off-site impacts or having any violations. We later decided that didn't make sense, that operating is mining or exploring. And so we sent the company a letter and told them they needed to react to this suspension. And they said, oh, well, the rules don't say that. So that even furthered our urge to fix this rule. In 2017, we finally had a rule written that we thought was great, and we went to both Ms. Fields and the Utah Mining Association as the informal rule group, and the comments we got back were so disparate, there was no way to mesh them and make them work. And the first round, we tried to change annual reporting requirements to add some information that people were concerned about. So we sort of scrapped it at that point and decided to start over and just fix the problem that we were trying to fix, which was the suspension part. So over the last, over the last year, we've listened again to Ms. Fields. We've had phone conferences with her. We've had in-person meetings with the Utah Mining Association. We've, at the request of Director Baza, we've included some members of the board who are experts in this area. We took their comments into account, and so we came up with a draft rule that we now have. The draft rule does take that 10-year commitment out, and the board, having to come to the board immediately, has been taken out. So a lot of the burden is now on the division, but now that we know if this rule gets in place and it's more clear which mines we should be pursuing more information from or moving towards having them reclaim, we feel like this rule will help us to take care of the problems that are out there where people are not abiding by the rules and they're just trying to avoid reclamation, and we're not going to be shutting down companies that are waiting for market conditions to change or have a legitimate interest in keeping a permit for longer than the 10 years or whatever the rule used to say. So we're trying to be more consistent with the statute. We want to be able to shut down operations that are just avoiding reclamation or where someone is not in compliance. Those would continue to be situations that we would bring to the board for your decision. if they can show us good cause and they are continuing to pay permit fees, they have a bond, no violations, they're maintaining their property, the safety of the public safety of the property, as well as the environmental aspects of the property, then we would allow them to continue to have a permit.
I just wanted to add one quick comment on this. The rule we're talking about today only affects the minerals
Right.
or non-coal regulatory program of the division. The coal mining program has its own set of rules and standards based on federal primacy. So this is only everything about mining except for coal.
I think I was done, unless, Paul, do you have anything to add? And then if the board has questions on the substance of the rule.
No, I don't think I do at this time. I mean, if the board has questions, I'll do what I can.
Board members? No questions?
Okay, Natasha's going to talk about the rulemaking timelines, and then we'll ask for permission to file a request for agency action once she gives you that information.
Yeah. So originally we had given you guys 3 options. I know that there's been talk of moving the January board meeting. So I've added a 4th option as well. So if you guys grant permission for us to do formal rulemaking, we'll have until the 31st, which is next Thursday, to submit it to e-rules. And then it will be published in the November 15th state bulletin, and that's when the comment period will start. At the December 11th board meeting, you guys can accept public comments. And then here's where the options come in. So option 1, and this would be the quickest route that we could do with administrative rules, is we could have the public comment period end on the 16th, but then you guys would have to approve the rule and evaluate comments and have that approved around December 24th. We could push that date out a little bit, but that would mean that you guys would need to come together and create or agree to the rule. Option 2 would bump the comment period ending date to the 14th and have you guys approve it on the 22nd, which is what the board meeting is scheduled for right now.
You're talking January, right?
Yeah, sorry, January 14th, and then you guys approve it on January 22nd. The 3rd option was having comment period end on the 22nd, so you guys could talk about the comments, but then you would have to wait 7 days and approve it on January 30th. The 4th option is we could have it end January 21st, and if we do push out the board meeting, you guys could approve it on January 29th. Are there?
And of course, you
Questions?
can select a much longer comment
Yeah.
period if you want, but it just lengthens out the process.
Yeah. So originally, I mean, my opinion was that option 2 would probably be one of the best ones, because then you don't have to have a second meeting to approve it. If you guys do end up moving out or pushing the board meeting back by a week, I think option 4 would be.
And Natasha, you mentioned something in there that I hadn't brought up, and you said there's a 7-day waiting period, or how does that work?
Waiting period maybe isn't the right phrase for it. You're supposed to consider all the comments and
Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that is the extent of our briefing to you today. We would now turn the time back to you and give you opportunity to conduct any further business.
Thank you, Director Baza. So we are now at the point on the agenda that we provide an opportunity for additional public comment. Is there anyone present that we haven't already heard from the public at large that would like to make a statement to the board at this time? Seeing none, we will go into a brief recess. Well, actually, yeah, we probably better just take about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we will proceed with the formal, the other part of our meeting today. Thank you.
What's that? Yeah, this is it. Yeah, and I think, you know, because after last time, how the draft came from them, and then it was like to try to, yeah, but it looks like, you know, between now and November 15th, the vision to draft proposed goals for rule. Starting, so there's not going to be a draft, even out there.
Or is this both of them?
That's